when Carla looked me straight in the eyes and whispered, "You're the first man in my 49 years to make me feel this way." I thought I knew what she meant. But what happened in the next 48 hours would shatter everything I believed about trust, courage, and what it really means to save someone's life. This isn't just a story about fixing a deck. It's about how one afternoon of honest work led to the most dangerous night of my life, and why sometimes the people who seem to have everything together are the ones who need rescuing the most. My name is Jim, and at 28, I've learned that life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. I run a small handyman business here in Portland, Oregon. Nothing fancy, just me, my truck, and a toolbox that's seen better days. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Most people see what I do as simple manual labor, but I've always believed there's something honest about working with your hands, about taking something broken and making it whole again. That Tuesday morning started like any other. I was sipping coffee from a thermos that had more dents than a demolition derby car, scrolling through my phone for new job requests. The notifications were the usual mix: leaky faucets, squeaky doors, the occasional fence repair. Then I saw a deck restoration job in the hills, posted just 20 minutes earlier. The address caught my attention immediately: Hillcrest Drive. That's where the money lives, where Portland's successful professionals retreat to their glass houses and designer gardens. I'd worked in that neighborhood before. Usually, it meant dealing with people who treated you like part of the furniture. Polite but distant, quick to point out every imperfection, slow to pay. But the work was good, and my bank account needed the boost. I'd been saving for months, to upgrade my equipment, maybe even hire another guy to help during busy season. Every job mattered. The listing was straightforward enough. Large deck needs complete restoration. Weathered wood, loose railings, safety concerns. Looking for experienced professional. Urgent. No photo, no detailed description, just the basics. What struck me was that last word, urgent. In my experience, when someone with money says urgent, they usually mean they're hosting a party next weekend and just noticed their deck looks like a shipwreck. I fired off a quick response, professional but confident. Within 10 minutes, my phone buzzed. A text from someone named Carla. "Can you come today? I'll pay extra for same-day service. Address is 847 Hillcrest Drive. Gate code 4739. The extra payment sealed it. I loaded my truck with everything I might need: power washer, sanders, stain, replacement boards, the whole arsenal. Portland's morning mist was just lifting as I drove through the winding roads that led up to Hillcrest. These weren't just houses. They were statements. Each one seemed to be trying to outdo the next, with modern architecture, perfect landscaping, and views that probably cost more than most people's entire homes. Number 847 stood out, but not in the way I expected. While its neighbors flaunted contemporary glass and steel, this house felt different, warmer somehow. It was a classic craftsman style, beautifully maintained but with a lived-in quality that suggested someone actually called it home rather than just using it as a showpiece. Mature oak trees created natural privacy, and the front garden showed the kind of careful attention that comes from genuine love, not just hired landscapers. I punched in the gate code and drove up a gravel driveway that curved around to reveal the back of the house. That's when I saw the deck, and I understood why the job was listed as urgent. What had probably once been a beautiful outdoor space now looked like it was barely holding together. The wood was so weathered it had turned almost silver. Several railing posts tilted at dangerous angles, and I could see gaps between boards that would make walking on it a legitimate safety hazard. But the view was incredible. The deck overlooked a steep hillside that dropped down into a valley filled with Douglas firs and maples just starting to show their fall colors. On a clear day, you could probably see Mount Hood in the distance. It was the kind of view that made you understand why someone would pay millions just to wake up to it every morning. I was still taking in the scope of the work when I heard footsteps on gravel behind me. I turned around and felt something shift in the air, though I couldn't have explained why at the time. Walking toward me was a woman who seemed to carry herself with the kind of confidence that comes from years of making important decisions. But there was something else in her expression, a tension around her eyes that suggested those decisions hadn't always been easy ones. She was probably in her late 40s, with dark hair pulled back in a way that was professional but not severe. She wore jeans and a cream-colored sweater that looked expensive but practical. And when she smiled, it reached her eyes in a way that told me she was genuinely glad I'd shown up. "You must be Jim," she said, extending her hand with a firm grip. "I'm Carla. Thank you for coming so quickly." Her voice had that quality that made you pay attention. Not loud or demanding, just clear and direct. But underneath the polished exterior, I sensed something else. Fatigue, maybe, or worry. The kind of weight that settles on people when they're carrying more than they let on. "No problem," I replied, gesturing toward the deck. "I can see why you called it urgent. When's the last time anyone worked on this?" She laughed. But it wasn't entirely happy. "Honestly, probably 5 years, maybe more. I keep meaning to deal with it, but—" She trailed off, looking out at the view. Life has a way of getting complicated. There was something in the way she said it that made me think she wasn't just talking about home maintenance. But that wasn't my business. I was here to fix a deck, not solve anyone's personal problems. "Well," I said, setting my toolbox down, "let's see what we're working with." As I knelt down to examine the foundation, I had no idea that this simple job was about to become anything but simple. I couldn't have known that by sunset, everything would change, for both of us. What I discovered about that deck in the next hour would have been enough to keep me busy for days. But it was what I discovered about Carla that made me realize this job was going to be different from anything I'd ever taken on. The structural damage was worse than it looked from a distance. As I crawled underneath the deck with my flashlight, I found rotted support beams, rusted bolts that crumbled at the touch, and foundation posts that had shifted so badly the entire structure was essentially held up by habit and hope. This wasn't just weathering. This was neglect bordering on dangerous. One good storm, or even a heavy party, and someone could get seriously hurt. "How bad is it?" Carla called down to me as I emerged from under the deck, brushing cobwebs from my hair. "Honestly, I'm surprised it's still standing," I said, wiping dirt from my hands. "This isn't just cosmetic work. We're talking about a complete rebuild. New foundation posts, replacement support beams, probably half the decking boards. It's going to take at least a week, maybe 2. I expected the usual reaction, sticker shock, followed by negotiations about what could be done cheaper or delayed. Instead, Carla just nodded and looked out toward the valley. "How much?" "For everything? We're looking at around 8,000, maybe 9 if we hit complications." I watched her face carefully. "I know that's not what you were expecting to hear. Money isn't the issue," she said quietly. Then, almost to herself, "It never really is it?" There was something in her tone that made me look at her more carefully. She was standing perfectly still, but her hands were clenched at her sides, and that tension around her eyes had deepened. This wasn't just about a deck. Something else was eating at her. "Are you okay?" I found myself asking, which was unusual for me. Normally, I stick to the work and let customers handle their own drama. She turned to me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Sorry, I'm being dramatic. It's just been a difficult few months." She gestured toward the deck. "When can you start?" "I can get materials delivered tomorrow, start teardown Thursday morning," I said. "But Carla, if you don't mind me asking, why the rush? Has someone been using this deck recently? Because honestly, it's not safe." Her laugh was sharp, bitter. No one's been using it. That's actually the problem." Before I could ask what she meant, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "We know where you live, Carla. Stop making this difficult." I only saw it because she'd pulled out her phone at the same time, and the message was displayed right there on her screen. The blood drained from her face as she read it. "Carla?" I said carefully. "Everything all right?" She quickly turned the phone face down, but her hands were shaking now. "Yes, fine. Just work stuff." But it wasn't work stuff. I could see it in the way her entire body had tensed, the way she kept glancing toward the road despite being up here behind a locked gate. This was fear, and it was real. "Listen," I said. "Maybe I should come back another time. Seems like you've got some things to deal with." "No." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The word came out sharper than she intended. She caught herself, softened her voice. "No, please." I really need this deck finished. It's important. I studied her face. In my line of work, you learn to read people pretty well. You have to know when someone's trying to scam you, when they're hiding damage they caused, when they're not going to pay. But this was different. This was someone who was scared but trying desperately not to show it. Carla, I don't know what's going on. But if someone's threatening you— They're not threatening me, she interrupted. Not exactly. It's complicated. Another text buzzed on her phone. She glanced at it and went even paler. You know what? Maybe we should call the police, I suggested. No. This time her voice was firm, final. No police. They can't help with this. She looked at me directly for the first time since the messages started. Jim, I know this is going to sound crazy, but I need to ask you something. How long would it take you to make this deck structurally sound? Not perfect, not beautiful, just safe enough to hold weight? Depends on the weight. For what? She hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. There are some people who might be coming by in the next few days. I need them to see that this house is lived in, that everything is normal. The deck is visible from the road below. If it looks abandoned or neglected— She didn't finish the sentence, but I was starting to understand. Someone was watching her house. Someone who cared about whether it looked occupied and maintained. What kind of people? I asked. The kind who noticed details, she said. The kind who would see a broken deck and think nobody's home. A chill ran down my spine. Carla, what have you gotten yourself into? For a moment I thought she might tell me. I could see her weighing it, deciding how much to trust a stranger with a toolbox. But then her phone buzzed again, and whatever moment of openness had existed snapped shut. Can you make it look normal by Friday? She asked instead. I'll pay you double, triple, if you can work evenings too. Friday was 3 days away. To make the deck even basically functional in that time would mean working 16-hour days, bringing in extra help, cutting corners I normally wouldn't cut. But the fear in her voice was real, and something about this whole situation was setting off every protective instinct I had. Yeah, I heard myself saying. I can do Friday. The relief that washed over her face was immediate and profound. Thank you. You have no idea what this means to me. But as I looked at the broken deck, the secluded house, and the woman who was clearly in more trouble than she was letting on, I was starting to get an idea. And I was starting to realize that fixing this deck might be the least complicated part of the job I'd just agreed to take on. I'll need to start first thing tomorrow, I said. And Carla, maybe you should think about staying somewhere else for a few days, just until we figure out what's really going on here. She shook her head. I can't leave. That's the whole point. She looked out at the valley again, but this time I could tell she wasn't seeing the view. She was seeing something much darker. This is my home, Jim, and I'm not going to let them take it from me. That night, I couldn't shake the image of Carla's face when those messages came through. I'd gone home to my small apartment across town, heated up leftover pizza, and tried to focus on planning out the deck job. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw that fear, raw and immediate, that she'd tried so hard to hide. By morning, I'd made a decision that probably wasn't smart, but felt absolutely necessary. I showed up at Carla's house at 6 a.m., 2 hours earlier than we'd discussed, with my truck loaded not just with construction materials but with something else, a plan that went way beyond carpentry. The gate code still worked, and I drove up to find the house dark and quiet. Too quiet. I sat in my truck for a moment, engine off, listening. In neighborhoods like this, you expect to hear something. Birds, distant traffic, maybe a neighbor's dog. But Hillcrest Drive felt unnaturally silent, like the whole street was holding its breath. I was unloading my tools when I heard the front door open. Carla appeared, wearing a robe and looking like she hadn't slept much. Her hair was loose around her shoulders and without makeup. She looked younger, but also more vulnerable. Jim, what are you doing here so early? Couldn't sleep, I said, which was true. Figured I'd get a jump on things. I gestured toward the lumber I'd already started stacking. I brought extra materials, enough to do this job right, not just make it look good from a distance. She walked closer, and I could see the confusion in her eyes. I told you, we just need it functional. I can't afford to. You're not paying for the extra materials, I interrupted. Consider it a professional upgrade. Jim, that's incredibly generous, but I can't accept. Yes, you can. I stopped unloading and looked at her directly. Carla, I went home last night and did some thinking. Whatever's going on here, whoever those people are who've been texting you, they're not going to be fooled by a quick patch job. If they're watching this place, really watching it, they'll know the difference between genuine repairs and window dressing. She was quiet for a long moment, studying my face. Why would you do this for someone you barely know? It was a fair question, and one I'd been asking myself all night. My grandmother used to say that sometimes you meet someone who's fighting a battle they can't talk about. She said when that happens, you don't ask questions. You just help however you can. Something shifted in Carla's expression. The careful walls she'd been maintaining started to crack just a little. Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman. She was. Raised me after my parents died. I hefted another board from the truck. She also taught me to recognize when someone's in real trouble, even when they're trying to handle it alone. Jim, Carla started, then stopped. She looked around the property, as if checking to make sure we were alone. There are things I can't tell you. Things that would put you in danger just for knowing. Then don't tell me, I said simply. But let me do the work right. Let me build you a deck that will actually protect you, not just fool someone looking from a distance. For the first time since I'd met her, Carla's professional composure completely crumbled. Her shoulders sagged, and she sat down heavily on the front steps. You have no idea what you're offering to walk into. I set down the board I was holding and sat beside her. Maybe not, but I know what I saw yesterday. I know someone's got you, scared enough to pay triple for rush work, and I know that whatever this is about, you shouldn't have to face it alone. She was quiet for so long that I started to think I'd overstepped. Then, without looking at me, she started talking. 3 months ago, I testified in a case. Corporate fraud, money laundering. The kind of thing that takes years to build and involves people with serious resources. Her voice was steady, professional, but I could hear the underlying tremor. The defendants were convicted, but their associates. Let's just say they're not the type to forget or forgive. Witness protection? I asked. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. I'm not important enough for that. I was just one lawyer among many. But apparently, I was thorough enough in my research to make some people very uncomfortable. So they're trying to scare you. More than that. She pulled out her phone and showed me yesterday's messages, plus several more that had come in overnight. Each one was more specific than the last. Details about her daily routine, places she'd been, things she couldn't have known they were watching unless they'd been following her for weeks. Carla, this is serious. I need to keep living my life, she said firmly. The moment I run, the moment I change my patterns or abandon my home, they win. And then they move on to the next person who helped put their friends in prison. I read through the messages again, and a cold certainty settled in my stomach. These weren't random threats. These people had been studying her, learning her habits, waiting for the right moment to make their move. When do you think they'll come? I asked. Friday. Maybe Saturday. She pointed toward the valley below. There's a service road down there that connects to this neighborhood. If someone wanted to access these houses without being seen from the main road, that's how they'd do it. I followed her gaze and immediately understood why the deck mattered so much. From that service road, you'd have a clear view of her property. An abandoned-looking deck would signal that the house was empty, vulnerable. But a construction project, workers coming and going, signs of active maintenance, that would suggest someone was home, paying attention, that the property wasn't as isolated as it appeared. How long have you been planning this? I asked. Since the first message arrived 2 weeks ago. She managed a small smile. I may be scared, Jim, but I'm not stupid. I know they're counting on me being alone when they finally decide to do more than just send texts. That's when it hit me. The real reason she'd hired me. Why she'd been so insistent about the timeline. Why she was willing to pay so much for what should have been a simple job. She wasn't just trying to make her house look occupied. She was trying to make sure she actually wouldn't be alone. You want me here when they come, I said. She met my eyes for the first time. I want them to see that this house isn't as isolated as they think. That someone else knows I exist. Someone who shows up every day. Someone who would notice if I disappeared. It was smart, I had to give her that. But it was also dangerous as hell. Carla, I'm a carpenter, not a bodyguard. If these people are as serious as you think, they are, she said quietly. But they're also careful. They don't want witnesses, and they don't want complications. Having you here, having obvious signs of ongoing work, might be enough to make them reconsider their approach. And if it's not enough? She was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked at me with an expression that was equal parts hope and desperation. Then at least I won't be facing it alone. Standing there in the early morning silence, looking at a woman who was clearly terrified but determined not to show it, I made the second decision in 12 hours that probably wasn't smart, but felt absolutely right. Okay, I said. But we're doing this my way. Real construction, real timeline, real protection. And if things go sideways, we call for help immediately. The relief that washed over her face was worth whatever risk I was taking on. Thank you, Jim. You have no idea what this means. But as I looked at the isolated house, the perfect view lines from the valley below, and the woman who was essentially using me as human camouflage against people who'd already proven they were watching her every move, I was starting to get a very clear idea of exactly what I'd just volunteered for. The work went faster than I'd expected, but not in the way I'd planned. By Thursday afternoon, I'd torn out the old decking and replaced the foundation posts, and Carla had started spending more time outside. At first, she claimed she was just checking on the progress, but I could tell she felt safer with someone around. The constant tension in her shoulders seemed to ease when she heard the steady rhythm of hammering and sawing. It was around 3 p.m. when everything changed. I was measuring boards for the new railing when I noticed a dark SUV parked on the service road below. It had been there for about 20 minutes, which was 19 minutes too long for someone who was just lost or making a phone call. I kept working, but I made sure to stay visible, to make noise, to make it clear that this property was very much occupied. They're down there, aren't they? Carla's voice came from behind me. She'd brought out 2 bottles of water and was trying to act casual, but her eyes kept drifting toward the valley. Yeah, I said, accepting the water. Same car? Different. One. Yesterday it was a silver sedan. She sat down on the stack of lumber I'd been using as a makeshift bench. They're getting bolder. We worked in companionable silence for the next hour, but I could feel the weight of being watched. Every movement felt deliberate, performed for an audience that was judging whether we looked like genuine workers or elaborate theater. I found myself overacting slightly, making sure my hammer strikes were loud enough to carry, taking my time, with measurements so it was clear this was real construction, not just busy work. Around 4:30, the SUV finally drove away, but neither of us relaxed. Jim, Carla said as I was cleaning up for the day, can I ask you something personal? Shoot. Why aren't you married? Good-looking guy, honest work, clearly decent. She trailed off, seeming to realize how that sounded. Sorry, that came out wrong. I'm just trying to understand why someone like you would risk getting involved in someone else's mess. I set down my tools and really looked at her. 3 days of working together had changed something between us. The careful politeness had given way to something more genuine, more comfortable. She'd started bringing me coffee in the mornings, asking about my other projects, sharing stories about the house and neighborhood. It felt natural in a way that surprised me. Honest answer, I said. I was engaged 2 years ago. Sarah. We had the whole thing planned. House in the suburbs, kids, white picket fence. What happened? She got a job offer in Chicago. Good money, career advancement, everything she'd worked for. I shrugged. She wanted me to come with her, start over, maybe go back to school for business management or something more stable than handyman work. But you didn't want to go. It wasn't that simple. I didn't want to stop being who I am. I gestured toward the half-built deck. This might not look like much to most people, but when I build something, it matters. When Mrs. Patterson down, the street can't afford to hire anyone else, and I fix her steps for free. That matters. When I help someone like you, I paused, trying to find the right words. I guess I realized that some things are more important than stability. Carla was quiet for a long moment, studying my face. So, you chose your principles over security. I chose being useful over being successful. Not everyone understands the difference. I do. Her voice was soft, almost whispered. More than you know. Something in her tone made me stop what I was doing and really look at her. The afternoon light was hitting her face at an angle that showed the exhaustion she'd been hiding, but also something else. A kind of recognition, like she was seeing me clearly for the first time. Carla? She took a deep breath, as if making a decision. Jim, I need to tell you something. About why this matters so much to me. Why I can't just run or hide or let them win. I sat down beside her on the lumber stack, close enough that I could smell her perfume mixed with the scent of sawdust and fresh wood. 5 years ago, I had a different life, she began. Married to a successful businessman, big house in Lake Oswego, all the right social connections. I was still practicing law, but mostly safe corporate stuff. Contracts, mergers, nothing controversial. What changed? I discovered my husband was laundering money for some very bad people. Not just skimming from his company, but actively facilitating. Drug trafficking, human smuggling, things that... She shuddered. When I confronted him, he told me I had two choices. Keep quiet and enjoy the lifestyle, or lose everything. You chose to lose everything. I chose to do the right thing. I gathered evidence, built a case, testified against him and his associates. She looked down at her hands. The divorce cost me most of my assets. The testimony cost me most of my friends, and the conviction made me a target for people who don't forgive or forget. I felt something shift in my chest, a combination of admiration and protectiveness that caught me off guard. So, when you hired me, I was looking for someone who would do the job right, regardless of the circumstances. Someone who wouldn't cut corners just because it was easier. She turned to face me directly. What I found was someone who understood that sometimes doing the right thing costs more than you want to pay. The way she was looking at me, it was like she was seeing something in me that I'd never quite seen in myself. Not just competence or reliability, but something deeper. Jim, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. You're the first man in my 49 years to make me feel this way. What way? I asked, though part of me already knew. Safe. Not because you're bigger or stronger or more dangerous than whoever's threatening me, but because you're here for the right reasons. Because when you say you'll do something, you mean it. Because you see people who need help and you help them, even when it's not easy or profitable or smart. The space between us seemed to shrink, and I realized that somewhere in the past 3 days, this had stopped being just about fixing a deck or even protecting someone in trouble. This had become about two people who'd both paid a price for refusing to compromise their principles, recognizing something essential in each other. Carla, I said carefully, you know this situation is temporary. Once we get through whatever's coming, once you're safe. I know, she said quickly. I'm not asking for promises or commitments. I'm just telling you that for the first time in 5 years, I don't feel completely alone in this. And that's because of who you are, not just what you're doing. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text. Unknown number. Enjoying your construction project? Hope you're not getting too attached. The message was clearly meant for me, not Carla, which meant they knew exactly who I was and why I was there. Carla saw my expression and immediately understood. They're watching you too now. Looks like it. I showed her the message and watched her face go pale. Jim, this changes everything. If they're threatening you directly, then we're in this together, I said firmly. And tomorrow, when whatever's going to happen happens, at least we'll both know we're not facing it alone. She reached over and took my hand, her fingers intertwining with mine in a gesture that felt both intimate and protective. Together, she repeated softly. As the sun began to set over the valley, casting long shadows across the half-finished deck, I realized that Carla had been right about one thing. This situation was definitely temporary, but what had grown between us in just 3 days felt like something that could last much longer than whatever crisis we were about to face. The question was whether we'd both survive long enough to find out. Friday morning arrived with an unseasonable fog that clung to the hillside like a gray blanket, reducing visibility to maybe 50 yards. I'd barely slept, and from the looks of Carla when she met me at the door with coffee, neither had she. They came by the house last night, she said without preamble. Around 2 a.m. I heard a car in the driveway, saw headlights through my bedroom window. My blood went cold. Did you call the police? And tell them what? That someone drove up my driveway and left? She handed me the coffee, her hands steadier than I'd expected. There's no law against that. Besides, they were only here for about 30 seconds, just long enough to let me know they could get past the gate whenever they wanted. I walked to the front window and looked out at the driveway. Fresh tire tracks in the gravel, different from mine or Carla's car. Whoever had been here had driven something heavy, a truck or large SUV. They're escalating, I said. Testing boundaries, seeing how you react. Which means today is probably the day. Carla's voice was matter of fact, but I could see the tension in the way she held her shoulders. Jim, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Okay. If this goes bad, if they decide that having you here isn't enough of a deterrent, will you run? Will you call for help and get yourself out of here? The question hit me harder than I'd expected. 3 days ago, I would have said yes without hesitation. Self-preservation was basic common sense. But looking at Carla now, seeing the quiet courage in the way she was facing this, I realized my answer had changed somewhere along the way. No, I said simply. I won't run. Jim, that's not what I wanted to hear. Maybe not, but it's the truth. I set down my coffee and turned, to face her fully. Yesterday you told me I was the first man in 49 years to make you feel safe. Well, you're the first woman I've met who's made me want to be the kind of man worth that trust. Something flickered across her face. Surprise, gratitude, maybe something deeper. But before she could respond, my phone rang. Unknown number. Looked at Carla, who nodded. I answered. Jim, right? The voice was smooth, conversational, with just a hint of an accent I couldn't place. The handyman who's been doing such excellent work on Ms. Carla's deck. Who is this? Someone who appreciates quality craftsmanship. I've been watching your progress, and I have to say, you're very thorough, very dedicated. Carla had moved, close enough to hear both sides of the conversation. Her face had gone pale, but her jaw was set in a determined line. What do you want? I asked. Just to have a conversation. See, Miss Carla has something that belongs to some friends of mine. Documents, recordings, that sort of thing. And she's been very reluctant to return them. I don't know anything about any documents. Of course not. You're just the carpenter. There was amusement in his voice now, like he was enjoying a private joke. But here's the thing, Jim. Your presence there has created a bit of a complication for us. Makes things messier than they need to be. Good, I said before I could stop myself. The man laughed. I like you. You've got backbone, but backbone only gets you so far when you're outgunned and outnumbered. His tone shifted, becoming more serious. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to finish your work today, collect your payment, and leave. Tonight. Miss Carla will then have a quiet conversation with some associates of mine, and we'll resolve this matter privately. And if I don't leave, then you become part of the problem instead of just a witness to it. And trust me, Jim, you don't want to be part of this problem. The line went dead. Carla and I stared at each other in the sudden silence. The fog outside seemed to have gotten thicker, pressing against the windows like it was trying to get in. Well, she said finally, I guess that settles it. They're coming tonight. How many do you think? Minimum 3, probably more. They don't take chances. She walked to the kitchen and opened a drawer, pulling out a thick manila envelope. This is what they want. Copies of financial records, recorded conversations, evidence that could put another dozen people in prison. Why didn't you give it to the FBI? The DA's office? I did. But apparently, having official copies isn't enough for them. They want the originals destroyed, and they want to make sure no other copies exist. She held up the envelope. This represents 5 years of my life, Jim. 5 years of building cases, gathering evidence, making sure people like my ex-husband can't hurt anyone else. And they want you to just hand it over. They want me to disappear. The envelope is just the excuse. She looked out toward the valley, where the fog was starting to lift slightly. If I give them this, they'll kill me anyway. Can't have loose ends. The casual way she said it, like she was discussing the weather, hit me harder than any dramatic declaration could have. This wasn't hysteria or paranoia. This was a lawyer who'd spent years dealing with criminals, making a professional assessment of her situation. "So what's the plan?" I asked. "I don't have one," she admitted. "I was hoping having you here would be enough to buy me time, maybe make them think twice. But after that phone call..." "They're not thinking twice. They're coming regardless." I looked around the house, taking in sight lines, entry points, defensible positions. "Carla, this place is beautiful, but it's not built for defense. Too many windows, too many ways in." I know. I've been thinking the same thing." She paused, then looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Jim, there's something else I need to tell you. Something I probably should have mentioned before." The way she said it made my stomach clench. "What?" "I'm not just some lawyer who happened to stumble onto evidence. I was working undercover for the FBI for 2 years before my divorce. The marriage, the lifestyle, even some of the cases I took. It was all part of a larger investigation." The pieces clicked into place with an almost audible snap. "You're not the victim here. You're the asset. Was the asset. The investigation wrapped up, the trials are over, and officially, I'm on my own now." She managed a weak smile. "Turns out, on your own is a very lonely place to be. But unofficially? Unofficially, there are people who would be very interested to know that Ms. Carla Evans, former FBI consultant, was about to have an unfortunate accident." She looked at the envelope in her hands. "This isn't just evidence, Jim. It's insurance. As long as it exists, as long as I exist, certain people have to worry about what else might surface." Standing in that fog-wrapped house, looking at a woman who'd spent years living a lie to catch criminals, I realized that everything I thought I knew about the situation was wrong. Carla wasn't just someone in trouble. She was someone who'd made it her business to be trouble for very dangerous people. "So," I said slowly, "when they come tonight, they're not just coming for the envelope." "No," she said quietly. "They're coming to finish a job they should have done months ago." The fog outside was lifting, and through the clearing air, I could see movement on the service road below. 3 vehicles, moving slowly, like they were scouting positions. "Carla," I said, "I think they're coming a lot sooner than tonight." The vehicles had stopped moving, positioned at 3 different points along the service road like pieces on a chessboard. From our elevated position, I could see them clearly through the lifting fog. A black SUV, a gray pickup truck, and what looked like a white panel van. They were coordinating, probably communicating by radio. Definitely not here for a friendly conversation. "How long do we have?" Carla asked, her voice surprisingly steady. "Maybe 20 minutes before they decide to move. Less if they think we've spotted them." I was already running calculations in my head. Escape routes, defensive, positions, options that didn't involve either of us getting killed. "Is there a back way out of here?" "Fire road about half a mile through the woods, but it's rough terrain. We'd have to go on foot." She was looking at the vehicles below with the same analytical expression I'd seen her use when reviewing construction plans. "Jim, they're not going to let us just walk away from this." "Then we don't walk away. We make them come to us, and we make it cost them more than they want to pay." I was thinking out loud now. Military tactics my grandfather had taught me mixing, with contractors' knowledge of how buildings worked. This house has good sight lines, solid construction, and they can't surround it completely because of the terrain. You're talking about a siege. I'm talking about buying time until we can get help. I pulled out my phone to call 911, but there was no signal. Cell tower must be blocked or jammed. Carla wasn't surprised. "They're professionals, Jim. They've done this before. The gray pickup had started moving again, heading toward what looked like a hiking trail that led up the hillside. They were going to try to approach from multiple directions, probably hoping to catch us off guard, or force us to split our attention. Carla, I need you to tell me exactly what's in that envelope. Everything. Because our lives might depend on how badly they want it. She clutched the manila folder tighter. Financial records from 12 different shell companies, recorded conversations between my ex-husband and 3 different cartel representatives, and transaction logs that connect a Portland city councilman to a money laundering operation that processed over $50 million last year. Jesus Christ. The scope of it hit me like a physical blow. You're not just threatening a few criminals. You're threatening an entire network. Which is why they can't let me live, envelope or no envelope. She looked at me with an expression that was equal parts apology and determination. Jim, I'm sorry I got you into this. I thought having you here would make them think twice, but I underestimated how desperate they've become. Before I could respond, we heard the sound of vehicles approaching from the main road. Not trying to be subtle anymore. They were coming straight up the driveway. Through the front window, I could see the black SUV pulling through the gate, followed by 2 men on foot who'd clearly cut the lock. Back bedroom, I said. Now, stay away from windows and don't come out no matter what you hear. I'm not hiding while you… Carla. I grabbed her shoulders, looking directly into her eyes. I can't do what I need to do if I'm worried about protecting you. Please. She hesitated for a moment, then nodded and headed toward the back of the house. I heard a door close, then silence. The front door exploded inward about 30 seconds later. 3 men entered fast and professional, spreading out to cover different angles. The one in front was tall and lean with the kind of casual confidence that comes from years of violence. The other 2 were muscle, broad shoulders, alert eyes, hands that moved toward concealed weapons with practiced ease. Mr. Jim, the tall one said pleasantly. We meet at last. I'm Nick. His voice was the same one from the phone call. I have to say, your work on that deck is really quite impressive. Shame we're going to have to tear it down looking for Ms. Evans' little insurance policy. I was standing in the center of the living room, close enough to several potential weapons. A fireplace poker, a heavy glass vase, a wooden sculpture that could do serious damage if applied correctly. But 3 against 1, with them undoubtedly armed, meant I had to be smart about this. She's not here, I said. Nick smiled. Of course she is. We've been watching the house all morning. No one left. He gestured to one of his associates. Corey. Check the back rooms. Theo, take the kitchen and dining area. I told you she's gone. And I told you she isn't. Nick's pleasant demeanor didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. Here's what's going to happen, Jim. You're going to tell us exactly where Ms. Evans is hiding, and exactly where she's hidden our property. In exchange, we'll make this quick and relatively painless. And if I don't, then we take this house apart, board by board until we find what we're looking for, and you get to watch. He pulled a gun from inside his jacket. Nothing dramatic, just a casual motion like he was checking his phone. Unless you decide to be helpful, in which case you might even survive this. That's when I heard Carla scream from the back of the house. Every instinct told me to run toward the sound, but training kicked in instead. Nick expected me to react emotionally, to make a mistake. Instead, I grabbed the glass vase and threw it as hard as I could at the front window. The crash was deafening, and in the split second that Nick's attention shifted, I tackled him. We went down hard, his gun skittering across the hardwood floor. He was stronger than he looked, and better trained than I'd hoped, but I had 30 pounds on him, and the motivation that comes from knowing someone you care about is in immediate danger. I heard heavy footsteps running back toward the living room as Nick and I fought for position. The fireplace poker was just out of reach, but Nick was going for a knife I could see strapped to his ankle. I managed to pin his arm and drive my elbow into his solar plexus hard enough to make him gasp. Jim! Carla's voice from somewhere in the house. Not screaming now, but calling out like she was warning me about something. Then Corey appeared in the doorway, holding a gun pointed directly at my head. That's enough, he said. Both of you, stop moving. I froze, still holding Nick, in a partial headlock. Nick smiled up at me, blood trickling from his nose but his eyes bright with victory. "Like I said," Nick wheezed. "Professionals." Theo emerged from the kitchen, dragging Carla by the arm. She looked unharmed but furious, and I could see she was still clutching the manila envelope. "Found her trying to climb out a bedroom window," Theo reported. "And she had this with her." He gestured to the envelope. "Excellent." Nick pushed me off him and stood up, straightening his jacket. "Now we can all have a civilized conversation about how this is going to end." But as I looked at Carla, I saw something in her expression that Nick had missed. She wasn't defeated. She was waiting for something. That's when I heard the sirens in the distance, getting closer. Nick's head snapped toward the sound of sirens, his confident demeanor cracking. For the first time, the approaching wail of police cars was getting louder, maybe 2 miles out and closing fast. "How?" he demanded, spinning toward Carla. "We jammed the cell towers, cut the landline." "Silent alarm," Carla said simply. "Connected to a private security company that has a direct line to the sheriff's department. I activated it when your friend here came through the bedroom window." Corey and Theo exchanged glances, the kind of look that passed between professionals who just realized their carefully planned operation was falling apart. The sirens were definitely getting closer, maybe a mile out now. "We can still finish this," Corey said, tightening his grip on his weapon. 30 seconds, make it look like a break-in gone wrong." "Too messy," Nick replied, but I could see him calculating odds. Too many variables now. That's when Theo made the mistake that changed everything. Instead of keeping his gun trained on me, he shifted his attention to the approaching sirens, trying to gauge how much time they had. I launched myself across the space between us, driving my shoulder into his midsection and sending both of us crashing into the coffee table. The impact sent Carla's envelope flying, papers scattering across the room like oversized confetti. In the chaos that followed, Theo cursing and trying to bring his gun to bear, Corey shouting orders, Nick diving for his weapon on the floor. Carla did something that surprised all of us. She started grabbing papers and shoving them into the fireplace. "Stop her!" Nick yelled, but he was still wrestling with his gun, and Corey had his hands full trying to get a clear shot at me without hitting Theo. Carla struck a match. Apparently she'd been planning for this possibility, and the first batch of documents went up in flames. Financial records, transaction logs, recorded conversation transcripts, all turning to ash in a matter of seconds. "You stupid!" Corey started toward her, but the sirens had reached the driveway. We could hear car doors slamming, voices shouting. "Commands! Police! Everyone on the ground now!" What happened next was a blur of motion and confusion. Nick abandoned his weapon and headed for the back door. Corey followed, and Theo, still tangled up with me on the floor, tried to roll away and run. But it was too late. The front door, already damaged from their earlier entrance, burst open, completely as 4 sheriff's deputies flooded into the room. "Hands where we can see them! Nobody move!" I raised my hands immediately, staying perfectly still while chaos erupted around me. Theo tried to run and made it maybe 3 steps before a deputy tackled him. Carla stepped away from the fireplace, hands raised, still holding a lit match that she calmly blew out. "I'm Carla Evans," she called out clearly. "I'm the homeowner, and I called this in. The man on the floor next to the broken table is with them." She pointed at Theo, and 2 others ran out the back door. 2 deputies immediately headed toward the rear of the house, while the other 2 secured the scene. The whole thing was over in less than 2 minutes. But even as the immediate danger passed, I could see the toll the last hour had taken on Carla. Her hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was wearing off, and she sat down heavily on the couch, staring at the pile of ash in the fireplace. "Ma'am, are you injured?" one of the deputies asked. "No, I'm fine," she replied automatically, but she didn't look fine. She looked like someone who just watched 5 years of her life go up, in smoke. The next few hours were a whirlwind of statements, evidence collection, and explanations. Nick and Corey were caught trying to escape through the woods. Apparently the fire road Carla had mentioned wasn't as accessible as they'd thought. All 3 men were arrested, though I had a feeling their lawyers would have them out on bail within days. It wasn't until late afternoon, after the police had finished with their questions and the house had finally emptied out, that Carla and I had a chance to really talk about what had happened. "The envelope," I said. You burned everything. Not everything. She managed a small smile and pulled a thumb drive from her pocket. Digital copies. The papers were just backups. She paused, looking at the fireplace where ash still clung to the grate. But they don't know that. So this isn't over. It is for now. They got what they came for, or at least they think they did. It'll buy me time to figure out my next move. She looked around the house. Broken furniture, scattered glass, evidence tape across the doorway. I can't stay here anymore. The reality of that hit me harder than I'd expected. In just 5 days, this place had started to feel like something. Not home exactly, but a possibility of home. A place where Carla and I had found something together that neither of us had been looking for. Where will you go? I don't know. Yet. Somewhere they can't find me easily. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Jim, what happened today? You could have been killed. You almost were killed because of me. Because of what you chose to do 5 years ago, I corrected. Because you decided to stand up to people who hurt others for profit. That's not something to apologize for, isn't it? Look around. She gestured at the destruction. Look what it cost. I did look around, taking in the broken glass, the overturned furniture, the scorch marks in the fireplace. But I also saw the deck visible through the back window. Solid, well-built. Exactly what it was supposed to be. Carla, I said, 5 days ago, you hired me to fix your deck. But what really happened is that you gave me a chance to be part of something that mattered. To stand up for someone who needed standing up for. To be the kind of man I always wanted to be but never quite knew how. She was quiet for a long moment, processing what I'd said. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but certain. You're the first man in my 49 years to make me feel this way, Jim. Safe, but not because you're protecting me from danger. Safe because you see who I really am, and you think that person is worth protecting. Outside, the sun was setting over the valley, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that made even the damaged house look beautiful. Tomorrow, Carla would disappear to somewhere safe. Tomorrow, I'd go back to my regular life of fixing other people's problems. But tonight, we were here together, alive and whole, having survived something that should have destroyed us both. Whatever happens next, I said, this week mattered. What we found here mattered. Yes, she replied simply. It did. That evening, after the police had finally finished their work and the house fell quiet, Carla and I found ourselves sitting on the newly completed deck, sharing a bottle of wine she'd retrieved from a cabinet that had somehow survived the day's chaos. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. The deck I'd built to help her feel safe had become the only place in the house that still felt peaceful. Tell me about your grandmother, Carla said, settling into one of the 2 chairs I'd positioned, to face the valley view, the one who taught you to recognize when people are fighting battles they can't talk about. I smiled, remembering. Elena Vasquez. Toughest woman I ever knew. She raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 12. I took a sip of wine, feeling the warmth spread through my chest. She cleaned houses for wealthy families in West Hills, and she used to bring me along during summer breaks. That must have been interesting. Eye-opening is more like it. I saw how the other half lived, but I also saw how they treated people, like my grandmother, polite to her face, dismissive when they thought she couldn't hear. I paused, watching the lights start to twinkle in the valley below. But Elena never let it touch her dignity. She'd come home and tell me stories about the people she worked for. Not gossip, but observations about their loneliness, their fears, the ways they were struggling despite all their money. Carla leaned forward slightly. She taught you to see past the surface. She taught me that everyone's carrying something, and most people are doing the best they can with what they've got. I looked at Carla, taking in the exhaustion around her eyes. The way she held her shoulders like she was still braced for impact. She also taught me that sometimes the strongest people are the ones who've had to rebuild themselves from nothing. Something shifted in Carla's expression. Is that what you think I did? Rebuild myself? Didn't you? 5 years ago, you lost your marriage, your financial security, most of your social connections. But you didn't just survive it. You turned it into something meaningful. You used what you learned to help put dangerous people in prison. Carla was quiet for a long moment, swirling wine in her glass. I've never told anyone this, but after the divorce, after the testimony, I had a complete breakdown. 3 months where I couldn't get out of bed, couldn't function, couldn't see any point in continuing. What changed? A letter from a woman named Rosa Morales. Her daughter had disappeared 2 years earlier, and the police had given up looking. But Rosa had done her own investigation, and she'd traced her daughter's disappearance to one of the trafficking operations my testimony had helped expose. Carla's voice grew softer. She wrote to thank me, to tell me that because of what I'd done, the man responsible for her daughter's death was finally going to face justice. I felt something tighten in my chest. Did they find her daughter? No, but they found evidence of what had happened to her, and Rosa finally had answers. She could grieve properly, could stop wondering. Carla looked at me directly. That letter made me realize that my breakdown was a luxury Rosa couldn't afford, that my pain was real, but it wasn't the only thing that was real. So you rebuilt yourself around purpose instead of comfort. I tried to, but it's been lonely, Jim. Really lonely. She set down her wine glass and turned to face me fully. Do you know what it's like to live in a world where you can't trust anyone's motives? Where every new person you meet might be connected to people who want you dead? I thought about my own life, the simplicity of it, the straightforward nature of most problems I dealt with. A broken deck could be fixed with the right tools and enough time. But what Carla was describing was something else entirely. No, I said honestly. I don't know what that's like, but I know what it's like to feel like you're living someone else's definition of success instead of your own. Tell me. After Sarah left for Chicago, I went through a period where I questioned everything. Whether I was throwing my life away fixing other people's problems for barely enough money to live on. Whether I should have just swallowed my pride and followed her, gotten a real job with benefits and a retirement plan. But you didn't. No. But not because I was brave, because I was stubborn. I laughed, remembering those months of doubt. It took me almost a year to realize the difference between being stubborn and being authentic. Which is? Stubborn is holding on to something because you're afraid to change. Authentic is holding on to something because letting go would mean losing who you are. Carla nodded slowly. I understand that more than you know. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the last light fade from the sky. The deck felt solid beneath us, a small island of stability in what had been a week of chaos. Jim, Carla said eventually, can I tell you something that might sound crazy? After this week, I think my definition of crazy has been permanently recalibrated. She smiled at that. When you first showed up here, when you agreed to take on this job under these circumstances, I thought you were either very brave or very naive. Which did you decide I was? Neither. I decided you were something I'd never encountered before, someone who makes decisions based on what feels right instead of what feels safe. She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. In my world, Jim, people calculate risk and reward. They weigh costs and benefits. They make strategic choices. And that's not what I do? You jumped into a situation you didn't understand, to help someone you barely knew, with no guarantee of payment and a very real possibility of getting hurt. Most people would call that poor judgment. What would you call it? Integrity. The word hung in the air between us, simple and profound. You're the first person I've met in years who operates from integrity instead of self-interest. I felt something shift inside me, a recognition of truth in what she was saying. And you're the first person I've met who chose to do the right thing, even when it cost her everything. We're quite a pair, aren't we? She said with a wry smile. Yeah, I replied, looking out at the valley where lights were beginning to twinkle like stars. We really are. In that moment, sitting on the deck I'd built in the shadow of everything that had happened, I understood something that would stay with me for the rest of my life. Sometimes the most important connections aren't the ones you plan for or the ones that make logical sense. Sometimes they're the ones that form in crisis. between people who recognize something essential in each other, something worth protecting, worth fighting for, worth rebuilding your life around. Carla, I said quietly, whatever happens next, wherever you go from here, I want you to know that this week changed me. You changed me. Good, she replied, reaching over to take my hand. Because you changed me too. 3 weeks later, I was installing new kitchen cabinets for Mrs. Henderson when my phone rang. The number was blocked, but something made me answer. Anyway, Jim, it's Carla. The sound of her voice hit me like a physical force. I'd been wondering if I'd ever hear from her again, but I'd forced myself not to hope for it. People in witness protection don't exactly send Christmas cards. Are you safe? Was the first thing out of my mouth. Safer than I've been in years, actually. There was something different in her voice. Lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted. Can we meet? There's something I need to show you. An hour later, I was sitting in a coffee shop in downtown Portland, watching Carla walk through the door. She looked different. Her hair was shorter, lighter, and she was dressed more casually than I'd ever seen her. But her smile when she spotted me was exactly the same. You look good, I said as she sat down across from me. I feel good. Better than I have in years. She pulled out a tablet and set it on the table between us. Jim, do you remember that thumb drive I showed you? The digital copies? Yeah. Well, it turns out those files were more valuable than I thought. She touched the screen, and I saw a news article with the headline, Federal Task Force Dismantles Multi-State Criminal Network. The FBI used my evidence to launch a coordinated operation, 17 arrests across 4 states, including 2 city officials and a federal judge. I whistled low. That's incredible. It gets better. She scrolled to another article. They're offering me a consulting position, official federal consultant on financial crimes, with full protection and a legitimate cover identity. She looked up at me, eyes bright with excitement. Jim, I can come home. I can have a real life again. That's amazing, Carla. You deserve that. There's more. She hesitated, then pulled up something else on the tablet. They want me to head up a task force focusing on corporate crime in the Pacific Northwest, based here in Portland. I felt my heart skip. Here? You're coming back here? If I want to. She reached across the table and took my hand. The question is whether I have a reason to want to. The weight of what she was asking settled between us. This wasn't just about geography or career opportunities. This was about whether what we'd found in that week of chaos was something we wanted to build on. Carla, I need to tell you something, I said. After you left, I kept thinking about what you said, about integrity versus self-interest. It made me realize I'd been playing it safe my whole life, taking small jobs, avoiding anything that might challenge me. And I started my own company. Real construction, not just handyman work. I'm bidding on commercial projects, hiring other people, building something that matters. I paused, meeting her eyes. You didn't just change how I see other people, you changed how I see myself. Her smile was radiant. So we both rebuilt ourselves. Yeah, but I had help. I had the memory of someone who believed I was worth more than I thought I was. Jim, she said softly, you're the first man in my 49 years to make me feel like I could have both. A life that matters and someone to share it with. So, what do we do now? She squeezed my hand. Now we find out if what we built in a week can survive in the real world. I'd like to find out. Good, she said, because I already put in an offer on a house, one with a deck that needs some work. Laughed, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. I might know a guy who could help with that. I was hoping you'd say that. 6 months after Carla officially returned to Portland, I was standing in the office of what had become Vasquez Construction, named after my grandmother, who would have gotten a kick out of seeing her name on business cards and work trucks. The company had grown from just me with a toolbox to a team of 8 skilled craftsmen, and we were booked solid through the next season. The Morrison project came in under budget and ahead of schedule, I told Carla, who was reviewing our quarterly reports with the same thoroughness she'd once applied to criminal cases. And Mrs. Chen referred us to 3 more families in her neighborhood. Carla looked up from the spreadsheet, her reading glasses perched on her nose in a way that made her look both professional and approachable. Jim, these numbers are incredible. You've increased revenue by 300% since January. We've increased revenue, I corrected. I couldn't have done this without your help. It was true. When Carla had started her new position with the federal task force, she'd also begun consulting for Vasquez Construction. Not officially, but in the way that mattered. She'd helped me understand contracts, navigate business regulations, and most importantly, taught me to see my work as a business rather than just a series of individual jobs. Speaking of help, she said, I have something to run by you. The Giselle City is looking for contractors to bid on the new community center project. It's a $2 million job, Jim, the kind of project that could establish Vasquez Construction as a major player. The old me would have immediately started listing reasons why we weren't ready for something that big. The new me, the one who'd learned from Carla that integrity and ambition weren't mutually exclusive, felt a surge of excitement. What do you think? Are we ready for something like that? I think you're ready for anything you decide to take on, she replied. But more importantly, what do you think? I walked to the window that overlooked our equipment yard, where 3 trucks sat ready for tomorrow's jobs. Each one represented growth, progress, the kind of success I'd never imagined when I was working alone out of my beat-up pickup. I think Elena would have told me to stop asking permission and start acting like the man I want to be. Smart woman, your grandmother. She would have loved you, I said, turning back to Carla. She always said the best people are the ones who've been knocked down and chosen to get back up stronger. Carla removed her glasses and set aside the reports. Jim, there's something else I want to talk to you about. Something personal. The shift in her tone made me pay attention. Over the past 6 months, as we'd built both a business partnership and something deeper, I'd learned to read her moods, her expressions, the subtle ways she communicated what mattered to her. What's on your mind? The task force work is going well, really well. We've made major progress on 3 different cases, and there's talk of expanding the program nationally. She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. They've offered me a promotion. Director of Financial Crimes Investigation, Pacific Region. It would mean travel, higher profile cases, more responsibility. That's incredible, Carla. You've earned it. It would also mean less time for... She gestured around the office. Less time for us. I felt something twist in my stomach. What are you saying? I'm saying I have a choice to make. A career that could define the rest of my professional life, or a life that includes the person who's helped me remember who I want to be outside of work. Those don't have to be mutually exclusive, don't they? She stood and moved to the window, beside me. Jim, what we've built here, what we've built together, it requires presence, attention, time. If I take this promotion, I'll be gone 3 weeks out of every month. And if you don't take it, then I stay here. Keep doing good work on a smaller scale, and see what else we can build together. She looked at me directly. The question is whether that's what you want too. I thought about the past 6 months, the way we'd challenged each other, supported each other, created something together that was bigger than either of us could have managed alone. I thought about my grandmother's advice to stop asking permission and start acting like the man I wanted to be. Carla, I said, 6 months ago, you asked me if I thought what we'd built in a week could survive in the real world. I remember. Well, I think we've answered that question. But now I have a different question. Which is? Do you want to see what we can build in a lifetime? 2 years later, I was putting the finishing touches on the community center that had launched Vasquez Construction into the major leagues when Carla arrived with coffee and the morning paper. The project had come in ahead of schedule and under budget, earning us recognition from the city and 3 more municipal contracts. Front page, she said, holding up the Portland Tribune. The headline read, Local Construction Company Wins State Award for Excellence. Elena would have framed this, I said, accepting the coffee and scanning the article. Listen to this. Vasquez Construction has become synonymous with quality, integrity, and community investment, taking on projects that other contractors avoid, and consistently delivering results that exceed expectations. She would have been proud, Carla agreed, settling beside me on the bench I'd installed outside the community center's main entrance. But I think she'd be even more proud of what you've done beyond the business. She was right. In the past 2 years, Vasquez Construction had sponsored 3 apprenticeship programs for young people from low-income families, partnered with a nonprofit to provide free home repairs for elderly residents, and established a scholarship fund in Elena's name. The success had been gratifying, but the impact had been transformative. Speaking of which, Carla continued, I got a call from Miguel yesterday. He passed his journeyman exam. Miguel Santos had been our first apprentice, a 19-year-old kid from the same neighborhood where I'd grown up, smart but with limited options until we'd given him a chance. Now he was leading his own crew and talking about starting his own company someday. That's fantastic. Elena always said the best way to honor the help you've received is to help someone else. Wise woman. Carla leaned against my shoulder, a gesture that had become natural over the months. Jim, there's something I need to tell you. The serious tone made me look at her more carefully. What's going on? The task force work. We've reached a milestone. The financial crimes network we've been tracking for 3 years. We finally have enough evidence to make arrests. Coordinated raids across 6 states, starting next week. That's incredible news. It is. And it means my part of this investigation is essentially complete. She paused, meeting my eyes. They're offering me that director position again. National level this time, based in D.C. My stomach dropped. We'd been through this conversation before, but I'd thought the moment had passed. And I turned it down. The relief that flooded through me was immediate and overwhelming. Carla, you didn't have to. Yes, I did. She turned to face me fully. Jim, 2 years ago, you asked me if I wanted to see what we could build in a lifetime. I've been thinking about that question ever since. And I realized that I spent most of my adult life building a career, building cases, building evidence against people who hurt others. Important work, necessary work, but work that kept me separate from the life I actually wanted to live. She gestured toward the community center where we could see families arriving for Saturday programs, kids running toward the playground we'd helped design. This, she said simply, this is what I want to build. A life with you, in a place that matters to us, doing work that makes a difference in ways we can see and touch. What about the federal position? The national impact? I'll still consult on major cases when they need me. But Jim, I'm 51 years old. I've spent enough time sacrificing personal happiness for professional advancement. She smiled, reaching for my hand. Besides, someone needs to make sure Vasquez Construction's financial operations stay above board. Are you proposing a permanent business partnership? Among other things, her smile turned mischievous. I may have already put an offer on a house, one with a spectacular view and a deck that's in desperate need of renovation. I laughed, remembering another deck, another house, another moment when Carla had changed the direction of my life with a simple decision to trust me. I might know a contractor who could help with that. I was hoping you'd say that. She leaned closer. Jim, you told me once that I was the first woman who'd made you want to be the kind of man worth trusting. Well, you're the first man who's made me want to build a life instead of just a career. Looking at her in the morning sunlight, with the community center behind us and all the possibilities of the future ahead, I understood something fundamental about love and partnership that I'd never grasped before. It wasn't about finding someone to complete you or fix you or change you. It was about finding someone who saw who you could become and helped you build toward that vision, one day at a time. So, I said, what do we build next? Everything, she replied simply. We build everything. 5 years after I first drove up that gravel driveway to fix what I thought was just a broken deck, I found myself standing in almost the exact same spot. But everything had changed. The house was different. Carla's new place, the one with the view that took your breath away, and the deck that had indeed needed my particular kind of attention. The business was different. Vasquez Construction now employed 23 people and had a reputation that stretched beyond Portland. But most importantly, I was different. Carla emerged from the house carrying 2 cups of coffee, a Saturday morning ritual that had become as natural as breathing. At 54, she moved with the confidence of someone who'd found exactly where she belonged, and when she smiled at me, I still felt that same recognition I'd experienced that first day, the sense of meeting someone who understood something essential about who I wanted to be. The Hendersons called, she said, settling beside me on the deck I'd built with my own hands. Their oldest daughter wants us to build her first house. Apparently, she grew up hearing stories about the contractors who saved her neighborhood and insisted her parents recommend us. That's the third referral this week from families whose kids are now adults, I replied. Miguel thinks we should start a program specifically for first-time homebuyers. Miguel's got good instincts. Elena would have approved of him. It was true. Miguel Santos, our first apprentice, now ran his own crew within Vasquez Construction and had become something like the younger brother I'd never had. 3 other young people had followed similar paths, and the apprenticeship program had become a model that other companies were starting to adopt. Carla, I said, looking out at the valley that stretched below us, do you ever think about that first week? About how different things could have gone? Every day, she replied without hesitation. And every day I'm grateful for the choice you made to stay, to help, to see something in me that was worth protecting. I've been thinking about that lately. About choices, and how the smallest ones sometimes have the biggest consequences. She turned to look at me more directly. What do you mean? I mean, when I decided to take that job, I thought I was just fixing a deck. When you decided to hire me, you thought you were just making your house look occupied. But what we were really doing was choosing to trust each other, even though we had no reason to. And that choice led to everything else. Exactly. I stood up, moving to the railing and looking out at the lights beginning to twinkle in the valley below. I think that's the real lesson here. It's not about grand gestures or dramatic moments. It's about showing up, doing the work, being the person you want to be even when, especially when, no one's watching. Carla joined me at the railing, her hand finding mine in a gesture that had become automatic over the years. You know what Elena would say about all this? What? She'd say we stopped asking permission to be happy and started building the life we actually wanted. I thought about my grandmother, about the woman who'd raised me to see past surfaces and recognize when people needed help they couldn't ask for, about how she'd taught me that the strongest people are often the ones who've had to rebuild themselves, and that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply show up for someone else's battle. You're right, I said. She would have loved this story. She would have loved you, Jim, the man you became. As the sun set over Portland, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that made everything look like a promise, I realized something that would have surprised my younger self. The deck I'd built that first week, the one that had brought us together, was long gone, torn down when Carla had to abandon that house. But what we'd built together since then, the trust, the partnership, the life we'd created, that was permanent. That was the kind of construction that lasted. So what do we build tomorrow? Carla asked, echoing the question that had become our shared philosophy. Tomorrow, I said, pulling her closer. We keep building. One day, one choice, one person at a time. Sometimes the most extraordinary transformations begin with the most ordinary moments. A broken deck, a stranger in need, a choice to help when you could just as easily walk away. The story of how I met Carla started with construction, but it was really about reconstruction, of trust, of purpose, of 2 lives that found their meaning in the decision to build something together. And in the end, that's what matters most. Not the structures we create, but the connections we forge, and the choice to keep building, even when the blueprint keeps changing. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.